So welcome everybody to this afternoon's workshop, and welcome to colleagues who are joining us online from the virtual platform as well. And I'm going to do my best with the acoustics in this room, because the acoustics, we've got a very high ceiling, and earlier on it was a little bit difficult for colleagues to hear what was happening in the room and what was happening in the virtual space. So I'm going to try a little bit harder to ensure that everybody can hear. So if anybody who's joining us virtually can't hear, please raise your hand on the Zoom or pop something in the chat so that I can just be aware of that. And if there are any questions that arise, please also pop those in the chat, or raise your virtual hand so that we can come to you in the virtual space. But I don't want to talk too much this afternoon, because I think what I would really like to do is to invite you all to have conversations together, because this afternoon's workshop, as it was before lunch, is thinking about effective models of volunteering services. And as we will have heard this morning, there are many different services and many different approaches. And also we talked about the complexity of evaluating the impact of services. So really what I would like to do is to share some examples with you, and to do that quite briefly, but then to invite us to come into groups. And I think with in the room here, one group, because we've got 2, 3, 4, 5 of us here to have a conversation and to share your own experiences, and the same similarly for our colleagues online. And I think we've got about 10 colleagues joining us online.
Currently 12.
Currently 12. So we may want to have 2 or 3 breakout rooms. Again, so we can have conversations in the breakout rooms. It's lovely to see all the faces online. Okay. So we're going to spend about half an hour in conversation, and then come back together and hear from each other about our experiences, but also to focus on what we know works well and what we think the characteristics are of effective volunteering approaches, what we've learned, what we think really works well. So just to kind of move us into that space briefly, I wanted to share just a few thoughts and a few more examples. So I'll just need to go to my presentation slides, and if I share the screen first, I can do that. Okay.
You can just share the screen.
Share this one?
Oh, this one's fine. So
yeah, lovely.
Yeah, and you can go to the presentation here.
Okay. Super. So I just need to be on slide 20.
So you're
on this.
So if you click on the slow button. Yeah.
Oh, no, need to go back. Sorry. Yeah, just back to, I think it's slide 20. Yes, that's the one. Lovely. Thank you. Thank you. Can I just check, can everybody on screen see the slide set? Just give me a thumbs up, those of you on screen. Yeah, great. Okay, lovely. And you can hear, everybody here, okay with sound? Great, lovely. Okay, so what I've shared on screen here, and again for colleagues who are joining us virtually, is the web link to all of the case studies and scenarios that are on the volunteering hub on the Hospice UK website. So you can click onto that link, and then you can find the descriptions of the different approaches to volunteering community services linked with the hospices. And there's an awful lot of information on that link, along with contact details of colleagues that you may wish to have conversations with or follow up with at a later date. So we'll post that link into the chat box when we come to the conversations. Okay, so, and again, I'm not going to go into detail, but just to share some of the examples and the different kinds of approaches, because I think when we think about that idea of what's effective, it's for me, it's almost about, well, what is our aim? You know, what is it we're really trying to do, and support and having that shared purpose.
Sorry.
Okay, yes, that better. Got this lovely lady helping me with the tech, so thank you. So yes, you can see the two examples here. These both from hospices in Scotland, and again, there's a Helping Hands volunteer programme, and again, this is about reaching out into very rural communities in the Highlands, and again, providing practical and emotional support to people who are approaching the end of life and their families. The details of these case studies are on the website, and I have some printed versions of those details as well, which I will share with you. Compassionate Inverclyde. So again, it's really interesting when we think about approaches, because very often there are different names for these approaches, but actually they're very similar. And the Compassionate Inverclyde is very much based on adopting a community development approach to developing volunteering and support in the community. And again, that is very much based on the public health palliative care approach, which is working very much in partnership with community, but community really coming together to agree what their aim is and what their understanding is and what their commitment is to community. That is very much led by the community, so not led by the hospice, but partnered with the hospice in this instance. And there are quite a lot of examples of this kind of approach emerging. Again, a different label, but the Companion Service. And this is a community volunteering programme from Dorothy House Hospice. And again, this is about supporting patients and families, but is a community-based, supporting people to undertake community-based activities. So again, this is about supporting people to be able to access social support. And again, there's a quote there of the benefits, and somebody talking about, about not being able to say anything but good about this service. And I think, that kind of feedback about how this really supported somebody to be heard and to be listened to, but also to take part in these activities. And said, yes, I couldn't have been matched with somebody better. But that kind of says to me, well, how does that happen? How do we match our volunteers with patients and families? What do we need to do for that to look good and be effective? Compassionate Neighbours and Hospice Neighbours, two very similar names, and actually two very similar approaches. But again, this is very much about compassionate neighbours and neighbours. Communities coming together to develop those services. And both of these hospices, these approaches are very aligned to the public health palliative care model. Again, I was talking about the State of Kerala earlier on this morning, and this work emanates from the work that they've undertaken in India, which is again very much based on communities coming together with that core purpose around palliative care and around supporting people journeying through their life and towards the end of their life. And that quote again there: see hospice care as a behaviour, not as a building. Again, we've got North London Hospice there, and again a community volunteering programme, and that's been running since 1984, and a carer support volunteer. So carer support volunteers run by St Francis to visit patients with life-limiting illness in the community. And that's interesting when you look at the detail, because when that was first established, it was, the thought was that actually this was about providing respite support for carers, and it was about supporting patients, people to engage in social activities outside of the house. But what they found with this project, but there were more and more people who for whom their condition meant that they weren't able to take part in activities outside of the house. So they had to readjust what they were doing in terms of still being able to provide the carer respite. So they refocused on who they were providing the service for, because it wasn't meeting the needs of people that were needing the service. And there's some other examples, and I'm just going to leave those examples there, and they will be in the slide set that you can access. But I think just to see that whole range of befriending services, of bereavement help points, it was wonderful, wasn't it, listening to our colleagues at Sue Ryder this morning talking about the services they've developed to support the bereaved, and again in the online environment, particularly since the pandemic, being able to connect people and for people to be able to access support. And then I've also linked there the A to Z of volunteering for Princess Alice, because there are some really lovely resources on the Princess Alice Hospice website in relation to volunteering. So I talked as well this morning about the toolkit that had been developed as part of the work that Dr. Ross Scott had undertaken for Hospice UK. And again, the links are here, but that's a practical resource. And it talks about the appreciative inquiry approach. And I don't know if that's something which some of you will be familiar with, but it talks about, again, if somebody is starting out with this, you know, how do we ensure that everybody has that shared purpose? So there's a lot of detail on this slide. But forgive me, but you will have the access to the actual toolkit on the website. And I think the point is that it's about an exploration. It's not about actually people determining what it is a community will do or how they will do it, but that being explored as a collaborative approach. So that's the volunteering hub, and those are some of the references around the different approaches. And there are some evaluations on there as well in the literature. But going back to this morning, we were hearing a little bit, weren't we, from John about how he was approaching the evaluation. And also we were hearing from Professor John Ellershaw, about the planned evaluation of the work he's involved in. And I think that, you know, it just shows the importance of it, but also that actually we're early stages of understanding. And I think that, you know, this resource was developed and the report was written prior to the pandemic. And then, as we know, from 2020 onwards, a lot has changed. And so, you know, there's been a lot more adaptation of the ways that we've been able to approach and work together. I put those references on, and particularly wanted to just highlight the report from the Lancet Commission on the value of death and bringing death back to life. And that is, again, a hugely important piece of work, commission and work in the report with a real focus on the community being actively involved in care of the dying, and that normalisation of it as part of life. And celebrating that within our society, just as we do when there's a new birth. So it was, I think, for me, really important recent report that has been published that will influence what we do and how we think about palliative care. And then there's some examples of handbooks and also volunteer policy. And there are lots on the website, but I just chose those because the St Nicholas Volunteer Handbook, I think, has got a lot of detail in there that's very helpful. And Together for Short Lives, who've been working with children's hospices. I just also wanted to mention as well, because we were talking all care settings, and we've heard Professor Ellershaw talking about the work that he's been undertaking. And I just wanted to also highlight the Anne Robeson Trust. And we've got colleagues here today who are butterfly volunteers, and Anne Robeson initiated the butterfly volunteers and has gone on to develop the Anne Robeson Trust. And there are 8 NHS acute trusts who have volunteers working. And so the Anne Robeson Trust provides support and training for coordinators in the acute trusts to establish an end-of-life care companion programme, and provides lots of resources. So Liz has provided her contact details there for you. And again, if that's something that of interest, you'll be able to follow that up. Okay, so I am going to stop sharing and come away from that slide set. And what I would like us to do is we're going to set up, I think we need to maybe set up 3 breakout groups. We've got 19 colleagues with us online. So we're about groups of about 20. Okay, so 4 groups of 5 then. How does that work? 4 breakout rooms of 5. And again, so just before we go into breakout rooms, what I'm going to invite you to do, and we're going to be 1 group here in the room and 5 groups online, is to introduce yourselves to each other, to share your experiences of volunteering, whether that's been establishing volunteering approaches, involved in what you think really sets up an effective service. What are the components? What are the challenges? How do we overcome the challenges? We heard Laura, Baroness Finlay, talking just now about the health and care bill and about palliative care being now part of everything we do. So I think that, that, and again, she talked about things being integrated. So how do we, understand the different services, and what do we think are the effective, the characteristics of effective models of volunteering? So I would like to invite you to do that. And I think we are at just 2:30. So if we could come back together, let's just check our timings. If we could come back together we've got 4, 5 groups. So I think if we could come back together at 10 to 1, so that we've got 2:40. Sorry, 10 to 3, 10 to 3 even would be better, wouldn't it? So 10 to 3, so that we've got, about 20 minutes in conversation. Okay, is everybody okay? Can you give me a thumbs up if you're okay in our breakout rooms, or will be okay in our breakout rooms? Brilliant. Okay, and we'll all come back together and just reflect back conversations. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Gosh, 20 minutes goes by, doesn't it, very quickly, and have been having some very interesting conversations here in the room, and I hope that you have had an opportunity to talk together in your breakout rooms. We have just a short time left now to 3:05. So what I'd like to do is to come to our colleagues joining us online first of all, and anybody that was in breakout room 1, I don't know if you noticed which rooms you were in, but if anybody would like to just reflect back any of the conversations that you were having, in particular, what you were thinking about is important in terms of effective volunteering approaches and models. So anybody like to put their hand up in breakout room 1, and hopefully we can all hear in the room as you're talking. See anybody's hand?
I'm going to nominate Phil.
Andrew, did you put your hands up, Andrew? Where are we? So I can see Phil. Lovely. Phil, you've taken yourself off mute. So would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, we were, most of our group were just at the front end of either volunteered historically or were just beginning to look at developing some volunteering for themselves with other organisations. So we didn't have much in terms of models, but one thing that came up was from Dermot was about consistency and being able to be in a volunteering setup where you have consistent relationship with either the patients or the staff, so that can be ongoing relationship, because that builds up the trust and the ability to share, and people gain a confidence that they can talk to you. So, and that takes time sometimes. Sometimes you don't have that much time. I'm in an acute setting, and it's a bit like standing in a river. You know, the patients make contact and then move on very quickly. But in an end of life scenario, you usually have a little bit more opportunity to spend time and to get to know each other. But that consistency can really benefit looking after people.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Phil. Hugely important, isn't it? And we're talking about the commitment and the relationship, having that opportunity to build relationship. Thank you. Thank you very much. Would anybody from Breakout Room 2 like to share? Anybody like to come in and reflect any point from your conversation? Anything you highlighted that you felt was really important? Okay, so I can see Jay Golding. I'm sorry, I don't know what your first name is there. Would you like to come in? And I can also see Andrew with a hand up. So perhaps if you'd like to come off mute, is it Jane or John?
It's Julie. It's Julie. Hi.
It's Julie. Lovely. Julie, welcome.
Hello.
Talk to us, Julie.
I'm sorry there's no video. I'm struggling with connection this afternoon, so I've just gone to audio just to try and preserve the connection a bit. So we were talking about the importance of having support for volunteers when they've finished shifts and when they've faced difficult situations, that it's important that, you know, volunteers have a named person that they can go and talk to, so that they're not taking things home with them. And we talked a little bit about the importance of engaging staff in referring to services that are sort of run by volunteers. And then that can be quite difficult, you know, that sometimes staff struggle to know who to refer and when to refer, and that engaging with staff is a really important part of any sort of project in terms of trying to make it successful and get it off the ground. And then we just talked a little bit generally about volunteering in terms of the checks that we do for volunteers, and PVG and disclosures and references, and that sometimes, you know, when you're going through the disclosure process, it can be quite long and challenging for volunteers, and to keep them motivated during that. So that's about what we talked about, really.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Julie. Andrew, you had your hand up too. Would you like to add to that?
No, because I'm reporting from Group 4, and I put my hand up inadvertently.
Oh, lovely.
But I'll rush in, fools rush in, etc.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, we were looking at a number of things. I mean, Sian, from her experience in medicine, has seen volunteers drafted in an earlier generation without much training or thought, or etc., and then almost the swing of the pendulum the other way, bringing things into the NHS, and then perhaps over formalizing it, and we need to find perhaps a middle way. Mary's involved in Aston University at pre-nurse training and so forth, and maybe how medical staff are trained to cope with volunteers. But we concluded looking at the impact of the pandemic on neighbourliness and people's the sense of well-being and mutual support, and then what happened thereafter, and the revert from an initiative I've been involved in to try and grow street associations, etc. How we've reverted to sort of independent living again, and really for the cadres of volunteers that we'd like to be recruiting for the future, we need to kind of generate that sense of what volunteering can do out there in the community. And I guess that's where we concluded.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Really, really helpful points, and so important. And appreciate that balance. You know, that balance of how we support, but getting that right. Okay. So would anybody else like to come in from breakout room 3? I think we've got colleagues in a conference room on the top of my right of my screen. So I don't know if there's anybody, just to invite any other comments there, so I can see. And Anthony, would you like to join us?
Yes, thank you. So I found myself with a couple of learned colleagues in Group 3, and just adding on to the comments of previous groups, I think certainly the importance of all-round training for volunteers. Our experience in Australia is particularly interesting in that front, on that front too. But the importance of self-care, which really can't be overemphasised. And one of the other interesting things that came through from our group was really unsurprisingly, the importance of supervision, but also the risks of disenfranchising volunteers if supervision isn't done well. So that's perhaps given us a few things to think about. How do we ensure that for volunteers we are supporting them, and that we don't allow supervision to go wrong for them?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anthony. And I can see, Helen, you have your hand up. Would you like to?
Just one, I was in the same group as Anthony, but just one other point that I just jotted down from our conversation is in managing volunteers and in working with volunteers is recognising their professional background, which can be both a great gift, but also, you know, require particular sort of management in terms of boundaries, and them kind of being appropriate in terms of the role that they now occupy as in a volunteering service.
Thank you very much, Helen. Thank you. Okay, so is there anybody else on screen that would like to add to the conversation? Or okay, somebody, lovely hand up on the right-hand screen there, our volunteers that are all gathered, colleagues all gathered in the room together. Please join us.
Hi, I don't know if you can hear us clearly or not. Can you hear me okay?
Very quietly, we can hear you. My lovely colleague here is just going to see if we can increase the sound.
I've got a comment in the chat to talk about what we were discussing.
Okay, yes.
So I don't know if you've been able to access that, but we were just talking about how we could maybe continue that care, not just to end when the patient passes, but maybe even having that follow-up call to see how the families are doing post-bereavement.
Lovely, and I can see what you've put in the chat box. So you've talked about the example around signposting and support. For example, the Sea Rider services that we were hearing about this morning, and also that follow-up. So the importance of follow-up. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've just got a few minutes left. So please, can I just invite our colleagues here in the room, if there's any reflections you'd like to feed back to us. Anybody like to?
We discussed several things. One being aware of the additional needs of the people we're providing support for as a volunteer, such as their hygiene, their outlook in terms of providing a haircut, the pedicure, things like that. In addition to, you know, they might need help with groceries or tidying up the house, but also look at them as a human being and make sure that they're tidy as well. Another thing is the lack of diversity in the volunteering space. I guess we can speak about for the UK here. There are lots of